Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So this morning we'll be doing another Sutta study session with a discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya. So first we can pay homage to the Buddha, and then I'll start going through the discourse. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So this morning we'll be looking at Anguttara Nikaya chapter 10, sutta number 55, which is called the Parihana Sutta. So Parihana means decline. So this comes from the verb root ha, which means to fall. So Parihana means completely falling. The prefix pari meaning complete or thorough or all around. So Parihana means decline. And in the suttas, this word is normally used to talk about someone's Buddhist practice declining, when someone is backsliding instead of making progress. So the sutta begins. This is a discourse given by Venerable Sariputta, by the way. So the majority of the recorded suttas are attributed to the Buddha. The second most common teacher in the suttas is Venerable Sariputta, who was considered to be the Buddha's foremost disciple in wisdom. And then there's a handful of suttas given by other people. But after the Buddha, Venerable Sariputta has the most suttas. So Tatriko ayasma Sariputto bhikkhu amantesi. So Venerable Sariputta addressed the monks. Avaso bhikkhuveti, so venerable monks. The monks reply, and Venerable Sariputta says, Parihana Dhammo Pugulo, Parihana Dhammo Puguloti, Avaso Vuchati. So he says, we say a person who is subject to decline, so a person who is likely or liable to backslide in their progress, to fall away from the progress they've made. And he says, we also say, aparihana dhammo pugulo. We also talk about a person who is not subject to decline, a person who is not likely to backslide. And so Sariputta asked the monks, he says, Katavatanu ko avaso parihana dhammo pugulo vutto bhagavata. Katavata chapanam aparihana dhammo pugulo vutto bhagavata. So he says, so what is it that the Buddha spoke of as a person who is subject to decline and a person who is not subject to decline? In other words, how did the Buddha distinguish between a person who's likely to backslide in their progress versus a person who is not likely to backslide? And the monks reply, they say, Durato piko mayang avaso agachama ayasmato sariputtasa santike etasabasitasa atamanyatung. They say, we would come from afar to hear Venerable Sariputta explain this. Sadhuvatayasmantang yeva sariputang patibatu etasabasitasa atto. So he says it would be wonderful if Venerable Sariputta would explain the meaning of this statement. Ayasmato Sariputtasa Sutva Bhikkhu Dara Santi. So having heard it from Venerable Sariputta, the monks will remember. And Sariputta says, well, in that case, pay attention, and I'll explain. And then then Venerable Sariputta gives the first explanation. He says, Katavatanu ko avaso parihana dhammo pugulo vutto bhagavata. So what was it that the Buddha spoke of as a person who is liable to decline, subject to decline? He says, Idavaso bhikkhu asutancheva dhammang nasunati. So asuta means something that's not yet been heard. This is someone who does not listen to Dhamma that they haven't heard before. Sutachasa Dhamma sammo sangachanti. So sammosa, so it's actually related to the word moha, by the way. Sammosa is usually taken to mean forgetting, but it can also mean confusion or uncertainty. But normally when we say sammo sangachanti, we mean it's something that you're forgetting. But it can also mean something that you get confused about. So he says the Dhamma that you've already heard, you start forgetting it and getting unclear about it. Ye chasa Dhamma pubbe chetaso asamputta pubbo te chasa na samudacharanti. So this line here, so those Dhammas which in the past, so Dhamma pubbe, so Dhammas in the past, chetaso with the mind, asamputta pubba. So samputta means touched. And pubba again means past. So asamputta pubba means not touched in the past. So those things which one has not touched with one's mind in the past, one does not direct the mind towards. And interestingly enough, I was looking at some translations of this line, and I noticed that in both Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation and Bhante Suddhaso's translation, they translate this line with the opposite meaning. So saying those Dhammas which one has touched in the past, one does not direct the mind towards. So this seems to be a reversal of the word asamputta pubbo. So the prefix a means not or non. So things that have not been touched in the past. So I'm not sure if those two translators were looking at a different version of this text. Sometimes there's an alternate reading. But actually the line makes sense either way. But I'm going to take it as I have it in the Pali text here. So those Dhammas which one has not touched with one's mind in the past. So this means things which you haven't considered or reflected upon. One doesn't direct the mind to reflect on them more deeply. So this actually is a very common thing where it's like, oh yeah, I already know that. I don't need to think about it anymore. But actually, if you don't think deeply about it, then you may not come to fully understand it. Which actually is the next statement. So the next one is avinya tancheva na vijanati. So one does not understand what one has not yet understood. So the four things that lead to the decline of a person are, again, so not learning Dhamma teachings that you haven't heard before. So in these days, that would mean not reading the suttas, for example. If you haven't read through all the suttas, it means if you're not making an effort to read through the suttas, then this is something that can lead to a decline in your practice. Sutachasa Dhamma sammo sangachanti. So again, the Dhamma you have already learned, you start forgetting it or getting a little bit blurry and unclear about it. So for example, if you haven't read the suttas recently, maybe it's been a few years back, well, you start forgetting the details. And in time, you can even start to get a little bit blurry and confused about even the overarching principles of Dhamma. So it's very important to keep refreshing one's mind, even about the things that you've already learned. Don't take it for granted. You can forget things, or as time goes by, you can get unclear about exactly what you had learned before. I remember when I was staying at Bhavana Society, somebody once asked Bhanteji if he still reads the suttas. And Bhanteji said, yes, I'm always rereading the suttas over and over again. The person asked why. And Bhanteji said, because every time I reread them, I learn something new. This is coming from a monk who's 95 years old and has been reading suttas for 80 years now, 85 years. So this also it's emphasizing the value of continuously rereading the suttas, of constantly getting back in touch with the Buddha's words. And then this line, Ye chasa dhamma pube chetaso asamputta pubo. So those things, those dhammas which we have not previously touched with the mind, if you don't direct the mind towards them. So again, maybe you've learned some Dhamma, but you've never really thought deeply about it or considered it fully. If one doesn't make an effort to direct one's mind towards it and think about it and consider it and reflect upon it, then you're never really going to understand it. So we're not collecting data in order to pass a test or get a degree or something. But rather, we're collecting information about the Dhamma so that we can reflect deeply upon it and really understand what the Buddha is talking about. And just for completeness, as I mentioned in both Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhante Suddhaso's translation, they translated this line a bit differently. So Bhikkhu Bodhi said, one does not bring to mind those teachings with which one is already familiar. So again, this is taking the reverse meaning here. So something which one has already touched with the mind. One does not direct the mind towards that again. Which also is an interesting statement. So it's even if you think you already understand something, it's important to constantly reflect upon it and reconsider it. And sometimes one's understanding of things can vary and change over time. So even if you think you've understood something thoroughly, it never hurts to direct the mind towards it again. And then Sariputta says, and how does the Buddha define someone who's not liable to decline? So here he gives the reverse of those four. He says, asutan cheva dhammang sunati. So one listens to Dhamma that one has not yet heard. One learns Dhamma that one has not yet learned. Sutachasa Dhamma na sammo sangachanti. So one does not forget the Dhamma that one has already heard, and one does not fall into confusion about what one has already heard. So making sure we're not forgetting the Dhamma, but that we're constantly refreshing our memory. So there's one reason why in Buddhist monasteries we commonly chant every day. It's a way of constantly reminding ourselves of some of the core principles of Dhamma. Ye chasa Dhamma pubbe chetaso asamputta pubba te chasa samudacharanti. So he says, in those things which we have not directed the mind towards in the past, we direct the mind towards it now. So again, if there's something which we haven't deeply considered, then we make an effort to spend some time rolling it around in our mind and coming to a deeper understanding of it. And avinyatan cheva vijanati. So things which we don't yet understand, we make an effort to understand them. And he says, this is what the Buddha spoke of as a person who's not liable to decline. So all of this is emphasizing the study and contemplation of the Dhamma. So it's interesting here that Venerable Sariputta is not talking at all about meditation practice necessarily, but rather he's emphasizing the wisdom side of the Buddha's teachings. So emphasizing the learning of the Dhamma, reflecting on the Dhamma, making an effort to deeply contemplate and understand the Dhamma, and also the importance of memorizing the Dhamma, not letting the Dhamma slip away from our memory. And then Sariputta makes an interesting statement here. He says, Noche bhikkhu parachitta pariyaya kusalo hoti. So if a monk is not skilled in knowing other people's minds, Atta sachitta pariyaya kusalo bhavisamiti. Evan hivo avaso sikitabang. He says, then one should train oneself in this way. I will understand my own mind. So if you don't have the skill of knowing other people's minds, in other words, if you're not a telepath, or if you don't have a deep understanding of how to read somebody else's mind or discern what's going on in somebody else's mind, then he says, well, you should at least make an effort to understand your own mind. to be skilled in reading your own mind, clearly understanding your own mind. And he says, Katancha avaso bhikkhu satchitta pariyayu kusalo hoti. And he says, so, and how is it that a monk is skilled in the course of their own mind, skilled in reading their own mind? It says, Sayatapi avaso ittiva prasova daharo yuva mandanaka jatiko. So it's just as if there was a woman or a man who was young and beautiful and who likes adornments. He says, Ada seva parisuddhe paryodate acheva urapate. And they look in a mirror or a clear pool of water. Sakang mukhanamittang pachavekamano. And so looking at the reflection of their face. So a young, beautiful person looking at a reflection of their face. Sache tatapasati rajangva anganangva. So if they see any dust or blemish on their face, taseva rajasava anganasava pahanayava ayamati. So they make an effort to remove that dust or that blemish from their face. However, he says, noche tatapasati rajangva anganangva tene vatamano hoti paripuna sankapo laba vatame parisudang vatameti. So he says, but if one does not see any dust or any blemish on one's face, then one is satisfied because one's purpose has been fulfilled. And one thinks, oh, how wonderful, what a good thing that I am so pure. He says, Evameva ko avaso. So in the same way, bhikkhano pachavekana, a monk, when reflecting, bahukara hoti kusalesu dhammesu. When reflecting about the many things to be done in terms of wholesome dhammas. So what needs to be done? So one thinks, Anabhijalu nuko bahulang viharami, sang vichati nuko me eso dhammo udahuno, abhyapano chitta nuko bahulang viharami. So reflecting, so is my mind full of covetousness? Is my mind full or not? So is there something which is present in the mind or not? Again, if our mind is constantly full of longing, full of craving, then the Buddha says this is just like that beautiful young person who looks in the mirror and they see dirt smeared on their face. So in the same way, if we look in the mirror of our mind, and we see that it's prone to longing, prone to craving, then that's something that we should make an effort to remove from the mind. Next he says, abhyapano chitta. So is the mind usually free of aversion, or is it normally full of aversion? Are we constantly getting irritated or annoyed by things? If so, then once again, we should make an effort to purify the mind, to clean that out from the mind. Next, Vigadatina middo nuko balang viharami. So then one reflects, well, is my mind prone to dullness, prone to drowsiness and haziness? And next, anudato ko nukang bahulang virami. So is my mind normally free of agitation, or is it prone to agitation? Tinavichikitcho, so is my mind normally free of skepticism? Or is my mind normally prone to be filled with skepticism and doubt? So one might recognize these first five here as being the five hindrances, though phrased a bit differently than how we normally hear them. So normally we hear kama chanda, so interest and sensuality. But here the word that's being used is abhijalu, which means longing, covetousness. But otherwise it maps very neatly to the first five hindrances. And he goes on, akoto no nuko bahulang virhami. So do I normally dwell without anger in the mind? Or am I prone to being full of anger? Asankileta chitta. So is my mind normally defiled? So sankileta, defiled, is a very broad spectrum word that covers a wide range of different unwholesome states of mind, which we might be afflicted with. So one should closely examine one's own mind, constantly watching to see if there is any defilement present, if there is anything staining the mind. And so again, he says, if when reflecting in this way, if one sees that the mind is frequently free of longing, free of aversion, free of dullness, free of agitation, free of skepticism, free of anger, and free of defilement, then Sariputta says, one should reflect, labinu komhi ajaktang dhammapam mojasa. So one should have joy in the Dhamma. So this is another thing to ask, like, do I find joy in the Dhamma? When I hear the Dhamma, does that make me happy? So this is actually an interesting thing which sometimes happens, is sometimes when people hear the Dhamma, they actually get angry. They hear the Dhamma and it triggers their resistance. It's not what they want to hear. So they get angry, or they get depressed, or they get distracted. They just don't want to pay any attention. They get bored. But instead, if one has a deep commitment to the Dhamma and a real appreciation for the Dhamma, then when one hears the Dhamma being taught, then one is filled with happiness and gladness. It satisfies the mind. So this is another sign that one is not prone to decline. And the next thing on the list, he says, labinu komhi ajatang cheto samatasa. So one also reflects, am I able to attain serenity of mind? So here we're actually getting to something which is distinctly meditation related. So is one able to tranquilize and pacify and stabilize one's own mind? This also is something that we should examine ourselves for. And finally, the item on the list, he says, labinu komhi adipanya dhamma vipassanaya. So adipanya means the superior wisdom. So the prefix adi means superior. So adipanya, superior wisdom. Dhamma vipassana. So dhamma vipassana means insight into the Dhamma. So again, one should reflect, am I able to increase wisdom and have genuine insight into the Dhamma? So these are the things that we examine for in our own mind. So again, just like the beautiful young person looking in the mirror, checking to make sure that their face looks good. In the same way, we should examine our own mind, like we're looking at ourselves in a mirror, and check to see if we have these wonderful qualities, these bright and beautiful qualities of mind. So he says, Sachepana bhikkhu pachavekamano. So when examining themselves, sabbe pime kusale dhamme attini na samanupasati. If one does not see all of these wholesome qualities in one's mind, he says, then one should make a strong effort to gain those states. One should put forth effort and enthusiasm and energy. So he says, adimatto, so an extraordinary amount of chanda, which means interest or zeal. Vayama, so effort. Usaha means striving. Usolhi, endeavor. Apativani means unrelenting. He says unrelenting sati and sampajanya. So mindfulness and awareness. So one should put forth an extraordinary amount of effort and enthusiasm for cultivating these bright states of mind with unrelenting mindfulness and awareness. And he says, and here he uses a very famous simile. He says, Just as if there was a person whose hat or hair was on fire. Adita che lova, adita siso. So their hat or their hair is on fire. Taseva chela savasi sasava nibbana panaya adimatang chandansha, etc. So one would make an extraordinary effort to extinguish that fire on one's head. So he says, in the same way, if one recognizes that one does not have these bright and wholesome qualities of mind, then one should make an extraordinary effort to cultivate them, to develop them. But then he says, when one reflects on one's mind, so he says, Sache bhikkhu pachavekamano ekache kusali dhamme attini samanupasati. So when reflecting on your mind, you see that you have some of these qualities. Ekache kusali dhamme attini na samanupasati. But you don't have some of these qualities. Tenavaso bhikkhunaye kusali dhamme attini samanupasati tesu kusalesu dhamme supadetaya. So he says the ones that are already present, you should make an effort to stabilize them, to maintain them. And the ones that you don't yet have, again, you should make a sincere effort to bring them up, to cultivate them in your mind. And again, just as he uses again the simile, just as if your hat or your hair was on fire, you would make an effort to put it out. In the same way, if you see you're lacking even just a few of these qualities, then you should make a sincere effort to bring them up. And he concludes the discourse by saying, Sache panavaso pachavekamano sabepame kusale dhamme attini samanupasati. He says, however, Venerables, if when a monk is reflecting on their own mind, if they see that they actually have all of these wholesome qualities, he says, then Venerables, with the stabilization, the maintenance of all of these wholesome states, uttari asavanam kayaya yogo karanioti. One should further make an effort for the complete elimination of one's negative influences, one's asavas. So the asavas are the subconscious influences of mind, subconscious influence of towards defilement and delusion. So these subtle, pervasive tendencies of mind, which are always pulling us towards defilement and delusion. So Sariputta is saying, if you've fully developed all of the qualities that I just listed, then you just need to make an effort to remove the more subtle layers of defilement from the mind. So that's the end of this sutta. So at this time we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time I can take any questions that you might have. So hello to Ian, Jayanta, John, Gita, Amaranta, Sangtong, Sud, Ronald, Punam, SK, Jay, Minu, and Ajahn Pandit. Hello, Ajahn, good to see you. And Bhavani. And I see a couple of questions. So Ajahn Pandit asks, what's the difference between Samatha and Samadhi? I'm assuming you're asking on behalf of somebody else, because I'm sure you already know the answer to this question. So the word samatha comes from the root sam, which means peace. So the word samatha literally means peacefulness. So peacefulness of mind. Whereas the word samadhi actually comes from the root di, which means to hold. So samadhi means holding together or unifying or collecting together. So samatha is making the mind peaceful. Whereas samadhi is making the mind unified and stable. So there's a lot of overlap between the two, but they're not identical. So the mind can be peaceful, but not in samadhi. On the other hand, when the mind is in samadhi, it's always peaceful. So samadhi practice always includes samatha, but samatha practice doesn't necessarily involve being in a state of samadhi, a state of unified concentration. So the mind can be peaceful, but not fully immersed in samadhi. On the other hand, when the mind is fully immersed in samadhi, it is by definition already peaceful. So I usually think of samatha as being a more basic development of mind. So teaching the mind to be peaceful, it's more basic. Whereas samadhi is a bit more advanced in that it's training the mind to be unified, sharp, bright, clearly aware, and non-reactive. So a more advanced state of serenity. And Bhavani has a question that is a bit off topic, so it might be better for monk chat. I'll just have a quick look at this. So Bhavani says, the whole day my mind will be thinking about my enemies or troublemakers in order to protect myself from them. I'm very scared of rebirth. How to deal with this? By practicing metta. It's actually the number one most important thing. Practice metta, and constantly at all times. Constantly practice metta. And as for dealing with repetitive thoughts, mindfulness of the body, constantly bringing attention back to your body. So these two practices, so metta, loving kindness, and mindfulness of the body, these will help to clear away the fear and also the repetitive thinking. And if you're scared of rebirth, then you should commit to practicing the Noble Eightfold Path with diligence, because that's the only way to get free of rebirth. That's the last of the questions from online. Any questions from the monastery residents? No? You have a question?
I was just thinking, in reference to the first question, in terms of having that peaceful state of mind, would you say that state of mind can come about through practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, through sila, whereas samadhi really is only within in meditation?
So I think that samatha, or peacefulness of mind, can be attained in many ways. So practicing morality is one way that you can help to make your mind more peaceful. Practicing patience and equanimity in your daily life will also make the mind much more peaceful. Also, many active contemplations of mind will also make the mind more peaceful. And that makes it easier to enter samadhi. If you've already been cultivating peacefulness of mind, then it makes it much easier to enter samadhi. But yeah, I would agree that when we talk about samadhi, we're normally referring to concentration practice during meditation. We actually have a certain tiny amount of samadhi just as you're going throughout your day. There's always a certain tiny amount of samadhi present in the mind, but it's extremely minimal. It's very weak. It only becomes significant when one is doing meditation practice and really working on building up that samadhi. And we have another question online. Amaranta asks, my mind has been agitated and I'm trying to stop some practices in my daily life to return to calm. How can I investigate during meditation? So I wouldn't necessarily recommend investigating during meditation. I recommend during meditation to focus on cultivating serenity of mind. And then as you're going through your daily life, pay attention to whatever you're doing that's making your mind agitated. So agitation is conditional. It's causally arisen. So the mind doesn't just randomly get agitated for no reason. The mind gets agitated because of causes and conditions that generate agitation. So pay attention. What is it that generates agitation? Is it some habit that you're doing? Is it some activity that you engage with? Is it the way that you relate to other people? Is it conversations that you're having? So what is it that's making the mind agitated? And try to change your relationship with those activities. Either reduce them or eliminate them from your day, or change your attitude to them in a way that they no longer generate agitation in the mind. But during meditation practice, I think it's most important just to focus on making the mind as bright and peaceful and alert as possible. And that will help to give you the clarity to clearly see what's going on in the rest of your life. And then this person, Dark Knight, says, how to overcome sensuality. Well, I'll be perfectly honest. If you want to overcome sensuality, then that means becoming a monastic. So if one is a lay person, then that usually means that you're not interested in overcoming sensuality. If you're interested in overcoming sensuality, then you become a monastic, because that's what this life is. And when you're a monastic, then we have many tools for overcoming sensuality. Well, most of these tools are not particularly relevant to the average lay person. So I'm a little bit hesitant to really give a direct answer to that question, because again, unless you're a monastic or inclining towards becoming one, this probably isn't really what you're looking for. And Ajahn Pandit says, what's the difference between Santi and Samatha? Well, they actually both come from the same root. They're extremely closely related. The meaning between the two is quite minimal. The main difference is that Santi means peace in a more general sense, whereas Samatha has the particular meaning of peacefulness and is almost always used as an adjective describing a state of mind, or a noun referring to practices that generate a peaceful state of mind. Whereas Santi more generally means peace in all of its different connotations. So the difference between these two words is actually quite minor. It's not really particularly significant. Richard asks, how long should one read the suttas and meditate each day to avoid decline? As much as you can. But I would say a basic minimum, if you want a basic minimum. 15 minutes of sutta reading, 30 minutes of meditation. That's a pretty reasonable minimum. Of course, more is better, but I think that's a good minimum. That's the last question from online. Anything else from in person? No? Okay, we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And you can come this evening for monk